Alrighty, this is our final artist talk today here in the Hazelhurst Gallery before we head across to the Broadhurst Gallery to the Painter Teacher exhibition. And we're joined by the oldest artist in the show, Kansas Smeaton. Kansas, thank you. So how about a big round of applause for Kansas? Kansas is an artist that I first met while she was studying at the National Art School. I was working at the National Art School, and Kansas was one of those students that was incredibly kind of diligent with her studio practice. So she's an artist that you could always, just go find her. She would be there at any time of day with a really beautiful practice. But also to a, we got microphones? Oh, wow, okay, yeah. One to share. I'll pass it to you. Oh, that's very loud. An incredible kind of practice that really is rooted in some of the stuff that I guess everyone sort of talks about to some degree, which is I might ditch this because thanks, Vilma. All good? No, it's all good. Sure? And so rooted in this kind of practice that is a lot about relationships and a lot about friends and the people around the artist. So Ollie talked about doing portraits of his friends, and similarly Kansas. That's something that's really, really big in your work. So do you want to talk about how that sort of first came about, I guess, during art school of painting people that you knew?
First thing I would say, just from all the talks, it's funny because you go into the studio and you're so focused on what you're doing, and then when you talk to other artists, you realize everyone is actually having the exact same experience as you. Being diligent about the studio practice, painting your friends, just everything that you guys said today, I can 100% relate to. With my friend, portraiture in general, for me, the subject is very, very important. I have always had an affinity to the sort of classical Renaissance style of the art historical canon, especially the Rococo and the Baroque, which traditionally has always painted people in the upper echelons or royal portraits. And so for me, I wanted to focus on the community, people who traditionally wouldn't be in that role. They wouldn't ever be in sort of like a high-class royal painting. Immediate members of my community, people who I admire, people who have been sort of on the margins of society, if you will.
Yeah. And maybe do you want to talk a little bit about who your community is and the sort of fabric of that, I guess.
A lot of creatives, members of the queer community, sex workers, and other people who are sort of liberal-minded.
Yeah. And how we talked about with the kind of panels and talking about people's stories and stuff, and one of the stories that you sort of talked about is so you were born in New Zealand and growing up in New Zealand in a kind of, I guess, like an alternative kind of community, a very open-minded.
I grew up in sort of my friends joke it was called the commune. It wasn't really. We just sort of idyllic kind of hippie community. My mum was very, very involved in theatre. She ran a theatre company, putting on Shakespeare. So I think I was introduced to the arts in general from a very, very young age. I grew up acting in plays and stuff, and I guess as well, I'm just sort of realising this now. It's my affinity to theatre, and my works are quite theatrical.
Yeah.
I set up a set. There's almost like they're on a stage, and rather than it being a moving image, it's a snapshot. Yeah.
And it's interesting when you talked about some of those art historical references and those different kind of periods, because the clothing that's featured in your work, or I guess we can say almost the costuming to borrow a theatrical sense, that's a really present thing. But, I've met a lot of your friends, and a lot of them sort of dress approximating that kind of style. So it's sort of weirdly coinciding with that kind of vein being present in fashion right now as well. Yeah.
Totally. The costume and dressing how you want to be perceived, for example. It does relate to theatre and I guess just existing in the world as the character who you want to be.
Yeah.
I think in that way, a lot of my works are quite collaborative. we talk about costuming together. Sometimes they bring things. Sometimes I ask what kind of colors do you like. Paint your nails in any color that you want. Sometimes I get nails made. Yeah.
Specifically for
it, yeah.
And it's interesting as well too, because you're working in this very kind of like traditional kind of style and it's traditional kind of medium, but you have like a very distinct social media presence and stuff, and you're often documenting the process of making works. And it's sort of, I find it interesting because you'll be sort of doing kind of progress shots, but you're also talking about your mental state at the time of like when will I finish these hands, or when will
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing because I think there's a tendency of some artists like, oh, I'm not showing it until it's it's perfect, it's on the thing. You're not trying to hide the kind of process, the underpainting, the sketching, how things are done. In fact, you give your kind of followers on social media, I guess, like an entry point into that world. And I can see them responding to it and the dialogue that you have. Yeah.
I think as well, I always loved when I was a student, or even now, I still just love seeing other artists' processes. So I look at a work and I'm like, how did they do that? And I a lot of the time, unless you're in the country or in the city, you can't actually go and see the work. So you can't really investigate how it's made. So I think I love to see artists' process shots. So then I was like, well, I'll probably share some of mine as well.
Yeah.
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 And I was saying before, I'm a very, very slow painter. So I am I think as well, I always have this pressure to sort of post, but I can only make so many works a year because I am very slow. I'm very considered. I use tiny little brushes. It takes a long time. So I sort of want to make sure I'm putting stuff out there, but I don't necessarily always have a finished work. Yeah.
And when you're designing the works or thinking about them, are you thinking about, for instance, in these kind of tableau kind of things, are you thinking about sort of like a pose and then finding a person for it, or are you taking the sort of pose off the sort of nature of the person?
So I always start with a painting. I sort of have an idea I've got a little list of people who I just come across in life, who I want to paint.
Yeah.
And then I always start with a painting. Similar to what Ollie was saying, he's referencing Fragonard in that work. I always start with a reference image and then I work from that.
Yeah. So that defines your composition?
That defines the composition. Then we go into the studio and I sort of, we build the set, and then sometimes it will come out similar, sometimes it will just be a completely different painting, but I always have to start with a reference image, and it's always a painting from art history.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think once again that kind of thing of showing the kind of process also speaks to the sort of performative nature of all of that, because like the building of the set, the person coming in, all of that's kind of documented and sort of exposed. So it's almost like this elongated performance, and then the artifact, the thing that's left over, is the painting, right? And the painting is imbued with all of that stuff, all of those relationships, all of those negotiations, both conceptually and spatially, but even just on a personal level.
Totally. I mean, sometimes someone will come in and the reference image that I have in mind, it just totally doesn't work with the person, or they're not very comfortable. So then I'm just like, okay, let's just scrap that. Let's do something else. Sit how you feel comfortable, and then that comes through, and that's the end result.
Yeah, it's funny because one thing that a lot of people, like not necessarily from the art world or artists, one thing they ask about paintings is how long did that painting take to make, right? There is this kind of thing that if it took a long time, it must be good, right? Because it took so much time, and of course that's not true. Paintings can be done incredibly fast or incredibly kind of slow. But you talked about that that kind of the length of time that it takes for you to make works. I mean, if you had to sort of conceptualize how many paintings a year you make roughly, what would it be?
I think 15 would be a highly productive year.
Yeah.
Where I've killed myself. I mean, my partner knows, he's often, what you said in the speech last night, being an artist is, you're only as good of an artist as the people around you can support you, There's many nights where he's cooked me dinner every night because I'm in the studio until 11. And especially as I get closer to a show, my time in the studio is like 9 to 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, long hours.
That's huge hours.
Huge hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you sustain yourself physically besides Spike's incredible food? Like I mean, I guess you're young. Like if I spent 14 hours doing anything, even lying down, I would be tired. But how do you do you feel that? Do you feel like pain in your hands? Do you
I feel pain in my hands. I mean, I've documented on my social media. One time I had RSI on my thumb so bad it was shaking like this.
Yeah.
I've learned to exercise, yoga, Pilates, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boring thing, but exercise and good diet actually does a lot.
Does a lot. And is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? Is this you know, like
you have to.
You have to.
Yeah. There's no other option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That compulsion, which has been
a
common thing of everything today. It's like we should set up like Painters Anonymous,
Oh my gosh.
And the first thing is admitting that you have a problem, right? Yeah. We'll pass the hat around later, just to cover tea and coffee. I might throw to any questions from the field here for Kansas. Yes.
So, as a younger artist and trying to obviously getting out there, like you're using different mediums like social media and stuff like that as well, right? But how hard is it like to support yourself as you're trying to get like known?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. Yeah. I mean, it's a struggle. If I didn't have a strong support network, I just don't think I would be able to do this. Yeah. Because when you're a painter, I think, you really just throw yourself into the studio and, it's something that's always going to be there for you on a very, very personal level, quite like what Jasper was saying, it's like you always have that routine and it doesn't matter what happens in your life, that is going to be there for you. And it's your meditation, it's your life. And similar to what Ollie was saying, it's everything that you create is essentially, I know he didn't want to get too deep, but everything you make is essentially a self-portrait and it's comes from you and it speaks to your deepest desires or the shadow self or anything like that, So it's very, very intense. So I think just making sure that you try and find the balance in any way that you can is the most essential thing. I don't know if that answered your question. I forgot what it was halfway through.
We got time for one more question. Any more questions? Sir?
Having come from what you said, a general arts background through your mother, through theatrical media, and what you've just said, being completely absorbed in painting now, but has that allowed you to go across the arts? Do you still do other things apart from painting?
I actually have a background in photography, and I do. When I set up a painting, I am working from photographs. I'm shooting it first. So, is that what you mean? Like I've worked in photography.
Yeah, I mean, could you stand on the stage again? Or do you?
No. I mean, I am now, kind of. No, I think it's just a part of, my life. But it's not something I wouldn't go back into stage. But I do still work in photography sometimes as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Kansas is a fantastic young artist, and the future's bright. She shows with Coma in East Sydney. So if you're interested, please get along and see her shows. A big round of applause for Kansas. And we might do one final round of applause for all the artists. Very, very generous. Yeah. Really beautiful to have the insight.